This story is titled, My Ex Demands Child Support for a Child That's Not Mine, and My Feminist Sister Takes Her Side. Hey everyone! If you're enjoying these stories and want to support the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps me bring you even more awesome content like this. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, a few months ago I got a message from my ex. It was weird because we hadn't spoken in years, not since we broke up 5 years ago. I remember staring at my phone, wondering if I should even reply. She didn't say much in the text, just that she wanted to talk. Part of me thought maybe she missed me or wanted to catch up, but that wasn't really her style. Still, I figured it couldn't hurt to hear her out. So, I agreed to meet up. When she showed up, she wasn't alone. There was a little boy with her. He looked about 5 years old, give or take, and she introduced him as my son. Yeah, just like that. No build-up, no easing into it, just, this is your son. I can't even explain the shock I felt. I just stared at her, then at the kid, and then back at her, trying to process what she'd just said. The math kind of worked out. It had been 5 years since we last talked, so I guess it was possible. But at the same time, it didn't feel right. We weren't exactly serious when we dated. She'd been pretty on and off with me and a few other guys. I'm not judging, people date around. But the point is, there was no way I could just take her word for it. So I told her, as calmly as I could, that I'd need a DNA test before anything else. She didn't take it well. Her face immediately twisted like I'd just insulted her. She started going on about how I should just trust her and how she wouldn't lie about something like this. Honestly, I wasn't trying to accuse her of lying, but let's be real. This is a huge deal. If the kid was mine, I'd want to know for sure before jumping into anything. I even told her I'd take full responsibility if the test came back positive. I said I'd cover all the costs, be in his life, and do whatever it took to step up as a dad. That didn't seem to matter to her. She was completely fixated on the fact that I didn't just take her word for it. She started listing all these reasons why a DNA test wasn't necessary. First, she said it was too expensive, which didn't even make sense because I offered to pay for it. Then she said it would be traumatizing for the kid. I mean, he wouldn't even know. It's just a cheek swab. It was excuse after excuse, and none of it added up. When I didn't budge, she switched tactics. She called me a deadbeat and accused me of trying to dodge my responsibility. She even dragged my family into it, calling my parents and telling them I was refusing to support my own child. That part really pissed me off because now my mom was blowing up my phone, demanding answers. I tried to explain everything to her, but she wasn't exactly neutral. She kept saying things like, if there's even a chance he's yours, you need to step up. Eventually, I put my foot down. I told my ex we weren't going any further until the DNA test was done. Period. She acted like I was the worst person in the world, but I stood my ground. A week later, we finally did the test. I can't lie, I was nervous waiting for the results. What if I was wrong? What if this kid really was mine? I started thinking about how my life would change. Would I have to co-parent with her? How would I explain this to future girlfriends? It was overwhelming, but when the results came back, I couldn't believe it. I wasn't the father. I felt a weird mix of relief and anger. Relief because I wasn't ready to be a dad, especially not in this way. But anger because she'd put me through so much stress for nothing. I called her as soon as I got the news, thinking she'd just accept it and move on. Instead, she flipped out again. She started crying, saying it wasn't fair and that I owed her money anyway for all the years she'd spent raising the kid. I told her straight up, I don't owe you anything. Then I hung up and blocked her number. I was done. After everything with my ex, I thought the drama was over. I mean, the DNA test came back negative, so that should have been the end of it, right? Wrong. Somehow, my family managed to make things worse. A couple of weeks after the whole ordeal, my parents decided to have a small family gathering. Nothing fancy, just a casual get-together at their house. I wasn't thrilled about going because I knew my mom would probably bring up the situation with my ex. She'd been on my case about it ever since my ex called her, but I figured it was better to show up and deal with it than to skip and hear about it later. The evening started out fine. My brother and I were hanging out in the living room, just catching up. At one point, he brought up the situation with my ex. He started cracking jokes about it, which honestly made me laugh. I know it might sound bad, but after all the stress she put me through, I felt like I deserved a moment to laugh about how ridiculous the whole thing was. My brother was on fire, coming up with jokes like, man, she really thought she could pull a Maury move on you. We were both dying, and even one of my friends who was there joined in. Then, out of nowhere, my sister stormed into the room. She looked absolutely furious. Before I could even say anything, she got in my face and started yelling. Are you seriously sitting here joking about this? She snapped. You're mocking a poor woman who's been struggling to raise a child on her own? Do you even realize how cruel that is? I was so caught off guard that I didn't even know how to respond. My brother tried to step in, saying it was just a joke, but that only made her angrier. She turned on him too, calling him immature and insensitive. At one point, she actually pushed me against the wall. It wasn't hard or anything, but still, it was enough to make everyone in the room stop and stare. My friend looked like he wanted to intervene, but I shook my head, signaling him to stay out of it. After her little outburst, she stormed out of the room, leaving everyone awkwardly quiet. My dad eventually tried to break the tension by changing the subject, but the vibe was ruined. I stayed quiet for the rest of the night, not wanting to stir up more drama. Later, when the party was winding down, my sister cornered me in the kitchen. She'd apparently dragged my parents in there too, because they were both standing behind her like backup. I could tell this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. She crossed her arms and started going off about how awful I was for putting my ex through a DNA test. According to her, I oppressed my ex by making her prove herself. She actually said I was contributing to the systemic mistrust of women. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You forced her to be a single mom, she said, glaring at me like I'd committed some kind of crime. You have a moral obligation to help her, whether the kid is yours or not. At that point, I lost my patience. Are you even listening to yourself? I shot back. She lied about me being the father. Why should I take responsibility for a kid that's not mine? My sister didn't back down. She claimed I probably tampered with the DNA results because men can do whatever they want. She also said the whole idea of a test was dehumanizing to my ex. My parents, who had been mostly quiet until now, finally chimed in. My dad said he didn't agree with my sister, but did think the jokes earlier were a bit cruel. My mom, on the other hand, was more on my sister's side. She said something about how women don't usually lie about these things, and maybe I should have been more understanding. My brother, bless him, jumped in to defend me. Mom, are you serious? She tried to scam him for child support. That's not exactly understanding material. The argument went back and forth for what felt like forever. My dad eventually shut it down, saying, "Look, the jokes were in bad taste, but you're not responsible for that kid. Let's just leave it at that." But my sister wasn't done. She pointed her finger at me and said, "I'm not talking to you again until you take responsibility for what you've done." What I've done? I asked, genuinely confused. What about what she's done? She lied, harassed me, and tried to ruin my reputation. That doesn't matter, she shouted. A woman's word should come first. At that point, I realized there was no reasoning with her. She'd already made up her mind that I was the bad guy. I walked out of the kitchen, not bothering to argue anymore. My brother followed me, muttering something about how she'd lost her mind. I tried to put the family drama behind me, but my sister wasn't letting it go. She was dead serious when she said she wasn't talking to me until I took responsibility. At first, I thought she just needed time to cool off and see reason, but nope, she doubled down. She completely cut me off, unfollowed me on social media, and even stopped showing up at family dinners if she knew I'd be there. Honestly, I was fine with the silent treatment. It was better than arguing. But then, things escalated. One day, I was at work, just going through my usual routine, when my phone started blowing up. First, it was texts from coworkers. Then, it was calls from my boss. Apparently, my sister and my ex had shown up outside my office with a giant handmade sign that had my face on it. The sign said, "Deadbeat dad, abandoned his child." They were parading it around for everyone to see, yelling about how I was a horrible person who refused to support my son. I can't even describe how humiliating that was. My coworkers were staring out the windows, taking pictures, and whispering to each other. My boss called me into his office and asked what the hell was going on. I tried to explain the situation, but I could tell he wasn't happy. He told me point blank, "I don't care what your personal drama is, but if this happens again, you're out. We can't have this kind of distraction here." When I left his office, I was furious. I went outside and confronted them. My ex started crying, saying I'd ruined her life, and my sister just stood there with her arms crossed, glaring at me like I was the scum of the earth. I told them both to leave or I'd call the cops. My sister had the audacity to laugh and say, "Go ahead. Show everyone how you silence women." At that point, I was done trying to reason with them. I went back inside, grabbed my phone, and called my lawyer. I explained everything, how they'd been harassing me, showing up at my workplace, and spreading lies. He told me we had more than enough to file a cease and desist, and if they kept it up, we could take it further. When my sister found out I was getting a lawyer involved, she lost it. She posted this long rant on social media about how I was trying to weaponize the legal system against a single mom and my own family. She said I was proving how entitled men are by refusing to take responsibility. My ex jumped on the bandwagon, posting about how I was ruining her and her son's lives. She claimed she just wanted what was fair and that I was using my privilege to escape accountability. The worst part? Some people actually believed them. I started getting messages from random strangers calling me a monster and telling me to do the right thing. A few extended family members even reached out, saying things like, "Are you sure the DNA test was accurate?" Or, "Maybe you should help her out," just to keep the peace. The only people solidly on my side were my dad and my brother. My mom was trying to stay neutral, but she kept saying things like, "Maybe there's a way to work this out without all the fighting." My dad, on the other hand, was pissed. He told my sister she was being ridiculous and that she needed to back off. But of course, she didn't listen. About a week later, I woke up to find my ex and sister had taken things to the next level. They'd made a public post on a community Facebook page, complete with pictures of me and the sign they'd made. The post was basically a full-blown attack, accusing me of being a deadbeat dad and saying I was hiding behind lawyers to avoid supporting my child. It got a ton of comments, most of them from people who didn't even know me, saying things like, "What a loser," and "How can people like this live with themselves?" At this point, my lawyer told me we needed to take immediate action. He drafted a legal letter for both of them, outlining all the ways they were harassing and defaming me. The letter made it clear that if they didn't stop, we'd take them to court. When my ex got the letter, she freaked out. She called me, crying and begging me to drop it. She said she'd take back everything she posted and promised to leave me alone if I didn't follow through. She even tried to guilt me, saying I was ruining her and her son's lives. But I'd had enough. I told her, "You had your chance to stop this. You didn't take it." As for my sister, she was just as stubborn as ever. She called the letter a bluff and posted about it on social media, claiming I was trying to silence women. She said the legal system was rigged in favor of men, and that I was using it to punish her for standing up for what she believed in. She even posted screenshots of the letter, trying to rally support from her followers. My lawyer and I took screenshots of every single post she made. It was all evidence, and she was handing it to us on a silver platter. Eventually, the community page moderators took down my ex's post after I sent them proof that her claims were false. That was a small win, but the damage was already done. I still had coworkers giving me side-eye and extended family questioning my character, but at least the tide was starting to turn. People were beginning to see that my ex and sister were going way too far. Meanwhile, my sister started realizing she was losing support. A few of her friends told her to back off, and some of our relatives called her out for taking things too far. But instead of stopping, she doubled down. She kept posting, kept making a scene, and kept dragging my name through the mud. At this point, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything blew up in her face. After sending out the cease and desist letters, I thought things might finally calm down. I mean, who would keep pushing after getting legal papers? Turns out, my sister and ex would. Instead of backing off, they ramped things up, mainly on social media. It was like they saw the legal notice as a challenge instead of a warning. My sister went on her platforms, ranting about how I was trying to silence her for standing up for a single mom who was abandoned by a deadbeat dad. She made it seem like this was some David versus Goliath situation, where I was the big bad guy abusing my power. My ex, not to be outdone, started posting about her poor son being abandoned and how she was just fighting to give him a better life. She talked about how I was weaponizing the legal system against her, claiming I was ruining her child's future by refusing to help financially. Of course, she left out the part where the DNA test proved the kid wasn't mine. It wasn't just their posts that made things bad. They encouraged their followers to harass me too. I started getting DMs from random strangers calling me a loser, a coward, and worse. People were commenting on my profile pictures with things like deadbeat and take care of your kid, jerk. At one point, someone even tried to review bomb the company I worked for, claiming they employed a known abuser. The thing is, I wasn't just dealing with the public drama. Behind the scenes, my family was still divided. My dad and brother had my back 100%. My dad even threatened to cut off my sister financially if she didn't stop. My brother, meanwhile, made it his mission to troll her posts, calling her out for her lies. But my mom was more complicated. She kept trying to mediate, saying stuff like, "Can't we all just sit down and work this out?" Or, "Maybe if you just apologized, this would blow over." I had to remind her that I had nothing to apologize for. My ex lied, and my sister chose to side with her despite all the proof. As the weeks went on, my lawyer and I collected every single post, comment, and message they made about me. It was honestly like they were trying to build my case for me. My ex was especially reckless. She'd make claims like, He admitted to me in private that he's the dad but refuses to help. Total lies. She even posted a picture of the DNA test results, claiming they were fake. My sister, meanwhile, was spouting nonsense about how I was a textbook example of male privilege. At first, I thought all this social media nonsense was just annoying. But my lawyer pointed out how useful it was. Every post they made became another piece of evidence we could use against them. The more they talked, the worse it got for them. What really pushed things over the edge was when my ex tried to get her story picked up by a local news site. She pitched it as a single mom's fight for justice kind of thing, but the reporter actually did their homework. When they contacted me for a statement, I sent them all the documentation, the DNA test results, screenshots of my ex admitting she lied, and the harassment I'd faced. Needless to say, the story never got published. That didn't stop my ex and sister from spiraling, though. My sister made a follow-up post accusing me of using my connections to shut down the article. She called me a misogynistic control freak who couldn't handle being held accountable. At this point, it was almost laughable how far they were reaching, but it still sucked to see my name dragged through the mud. Things took a sharp turn when my ex tried to organize a public protest. Yep, you read that right, a protest. She posted on social media, calling for people to show up outside my workplace with signs to raise awareness about what a horrible person I was. I guess she expected a big crowd, but only 3 people showed up. Her, my sister, and some random guy holding a sign that said, "Deadbeat dads deserve jail." The whole thing was pathetic, but it was also the final straw for my boss. He called me into his office again and told me flat out, "If this happens one more time, you're fired. I don't care who's right or wrong. I just can't have this disrupting the office." After that, my lawyer said it was time to escalate things. He filed the harassment lawsuit we'd been preparing. The suit included everything: defamation, workplace harassment, emotional distress, you name it. It wasn't just about the social media posts anymore. It was about how far they'd gone to ruin my life. When my ex found out about the lawsuit, she panicked. She called me, crying and begging me to drop it. She said she'd delete all her posts, stop contacting me, and take back everything if I'd just leave her alone. But I was done being the nice guy. I told her, "You had every chance to stop this. Now you'll have to deal with the consequences." My sister, on the other hand, didn't back down right away. She kept posting, insisting that I was bluffing and that I'd never actually go through with the lawsuit. She even mocked me in one of her posts, saying, "What's he gonna do, sue his own sister? Typical fragile male ego." But as the court date got closer, her confidence started to crack. Our extended family was getting involved now, and most of them were on my side. Even people who'd initially stayed neutral started calling her out, asking why she was going so far for a lie. My mom tried to talk to her, begging her to stop before it ruined her reputation, but my sister just accused her of enabling the patriarchy. Yeah, it was that bad. By the time the court hearing was set, my ex realized she didn't have a leg to stand on. She agreed to settle out of court, offering to pay damages in exchange for dropping the case. My sister, though, was left out in the cold. She had no legal grounds to stand on, and no one to back her up anymore. She'd gone all in on this crusade, and now she was facing the consequences. By the time everything came to a head, my ex had accepted reality. She caved and agreed to settle out of court, offering to pay for the damages she'd caused as long as I didn't push for harsher consequences. Honestly, I didn't care what she offered at that point. I just wanted her out of my life. She signed an agreement promising to delete every post, never contact me again, and cover the legal costs for the trouble she caused. The damage she did to my reputation at work and online was something I'd have to deal with, but at least she was out of the picture for good. That left my sister. She refused to back down, even after my ex bailed. In her mind, she was standing on some sort of moral high ground. She was still convinced that I was the villain in this story, and that I was punishing her for fighting for what she believed in. I could see the cracks forming, though. Her posts became less frequent, and when she did post, the likes and comments were way lower than before. People weren't buying into her narrative anymore. Our court date was set, and my sister's confidence finally started to crumble when my lawyer submitted the evidence we'd collected. Screenshots of her social media posts, videos of her protest outside my workplace, and records of her attempts to involve my coworkers and family. It was all laid out in black and white. The judge didn't have to look very hard to see the pattern of harassment. In the days leading up to the court appearance, my sister tried to play damage control. She started deleting posts, pretending like she hadn't spent months smearing my name online. The problem for her was that I already had everything backed up. Every single post, comment, and video was saved. I wasn't taking any chances. At the final conciliation meeting before the court date, My sister completely broke down. She showed up looking nothing like her usual confident self. Her shoulders were hunched, her face was pale, and she avoided eye contact with everyone in the room. When the lawyer laid out the case against her, she burst into tears. She begged me to drop the lawsuit, saying she didn't mean for things to get this far, and that she just wanted to support my ex. I didn't know she was lying, she cried. I thought I was doing the right thing. I stared at her for a moment, trying to decide if I believed her. Part of me wanted to think she was genuinely remorseful, but another part of me couldn't forget how far she'd gone. She hadn't just taken my ex's side, she'd actively tried to ruin my life. She'd harassed me, spread lies, and even risked my job. I wasn't about to let her off the hook just because she was suddenly sorry. You had plenty of chances to stop, I told her. I warned you, Dad warned you. Even Mom tried to talk some sense into you. But you kept pushing. This is on you. She sobbed harder, but I didn't budge. The meeting ended with her agreeing to a settlement. She'd have to pay me a significant amount in damages, plus all the legal fees I'd incurred. My lawyer made sure the agreement was airtight. There was no way for her to wriggle out of it. After the settlement, my sister's life took a serious hit. She didn't have the money to pay me outright, so my mom ended up helping her cover the costs. My dad wasn't happy about it, but my mom insisted, saying she couldn't stand to see her daughter suffer. The catch was that my sister would have to pay my mom back over time. Knowing my sister, that's probably going to be a long and painful process for both of them. The financial burden wasn't the only consequence my sister faced. Her social media presence, which she'd once used to rally people against me, became a ghost town. She deleted all her posts about the situation, but the damage to her reputation was already done. A lot of her friends distanced themselves from her, especially after finding out the truth about my ex's lies. Even some of our relatives, who'd initially taken her side, turned their backs on her. She went from being the self-righteous warrior to the outcast who'd gone too far. My ex, on the other hand, disappeared completely. I haven't heard a word from her since the settlement. And honestly, I prefer it that way. She caused enough chaos in my life, and I'm just glad she's gone. The situation with my sister put a permanent strain on our family. My dad hasn't spoken to her much since everything went down. He's still angry about how she sided with my ex and tried to destroy me. My brother barely acknowledges her existence, which is saying something because he's usually the peacekeeper in the family. As for my mom, she's stuck in the middle, trying to keep the family together, even though it's clear we'll never be the same. I've had to set some firm boundaries with my sister. She's tried to reach out a couple of times, but I'm not interested in rebuilding that relationship right now. Maybe someday, if she truly changes, I'll consider it. But for now, I'm focusing on the people who actually support me. Looking back, it's wild to think about how this all started. My ex showed up out of nowhere, claiming her son was mine, and somehow it spiraled into months of chaos. If I hadn't insisted on that DNA test, who knows where I'd be right now? Probably paying child support for a kid that isn't even mine. This whole ordeal taught me a lot about people. It showed me how far some will go to manipulate others, and how easily others can be swept up in lies. It also reminded me of the importance of standing your ground, even when the odds feel stacked against you. I won't pretend I handled everything perfectly. Maybe I shouldn't have joked about the situation with my brother. Maybe I could have tried harder to de-escalate things with my sister. But at the end of the day, I did what I had to do to protect myself, and I don't regret it. Now that everything is settled, I'm trying to move on. I've been focusing on my work and rebuilding my reputation there. My boss has been understanding, but I know it'll take time for people to stop associating me with the drama. I'm also reconnecting with friends and family members who stood by me through all this. Those relationships mean more to me now than ever. As for my sister, she's got a long road ahead of her. She'll be paying off her debt to my mom for years, and she'll have to figure out how to rebuild her own life. Maybe this will be a wake-up call for her, or maybe she'll double down on her bitterness. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. For the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe again. The storm has passed, and while there's still some cleanup to do, I'm finally free to move forward.